Welcome, everyone. This is Kelly Nazat, and I have David Hazard here, and we are having a conversation about Fire 3. It's about spiritual development and mysticism and ritual and finding new patterns in reality and really coming to a higher state of wisdom through all of the creative efforts and all of the Fire 1 self-awareness and all that. It all leads in the fire realm to this final phase, this mutable phase. So welcome, David.
I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for having me. Mysticism, ritual, all that.
Ceremony.
Yeah, ceremony.
This is, for many of us, it's our favorite place to be. And everything else just sort of sets the stage.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I have to say that the whole affinity with ritual and the mystical has always been a part of my life from the time I was a little kid, and I think that it is a part of most, if not many, if not most people's lives. I think we as kids, we are so open to the imaginal realm. And my experience when I've talked with adults about this is that they'll say, yeah, I remember that. I remember certain types of rituals coming to me that I wanted to do or had to do. And I lost them along the way. So for me, for example, I think I just stayed open to this for a long time. And I grew up in the country and spent a lot of time out in nature, in the streams and the swamps and marshes, out in the woods. And little habits began. I began to follow animal trails rather than the trails that people had made. And if you watched carefully, you could see where an animal, deer or some other animals, rabbits, had made a small trail. And I began to follow that. And why that's important is that I think a good ritual, that became a ritual for me, if you want to look at it that way, a good ritual will lead you to explore. That if a ritual is just about circling around and around and around about the same thing over and over again, then for me, to hell with it. If I'm opened up to exploration, so I'd go and explore these paths, and sometimes I would find myself wandering into even having to crouch down and get into these thickets, and then suddenly I realize that I'm stuck in the brambles somewhere. And you might think, well, that was a stupid thing to do, to follow that. But I realized then that I had to learn how to back myself out of places. And that really I might get scratched up a little bit, but nothing really ultimately hurt me. So I started to lose my fear of exploration, to this day, whether it's a project I'm involved with or a relationship I'm involved in, I always have this mental image of there's kind of almost no place you can get that you can't back up from and take with you the learning that you got there. Other little rituals started suggesting themselves. I think I was always a little nature guy, pagan, whatever you want to call that, earth person. And I remember one time being out with my best friend Herman. Herman Van Hatten was my best friend in 4th grade. And he came to play after school one day, and I took him out to the stream that I loved that was near my house. And we found this gorgeous red clay in one of the banks of the stream. So I had Herman take his top shirt off and our button-up shirts. And we used our T-shirts, our white T-shirts, which we completely ruined, filling them with red clay. And he said, what are we going to do with all this? And I had this idea. I said, we went back to my home, went out behind the garage, and Herman and I built this little ziggurat and got down on our hands and knees and started worshiping the sun god. Which, when my Catholic mother came out back and found out what I was doing, it didn't go over so well. We had to kneel down in the backyard and say Hail Marys and ask for forgiveness for worshiping a pagan god. But I just stayed open to wonder and transcendence. That's the point that I'm getting at with this story, is that I think when you find the rituals that speak either to your heart or from your heart, whichever way you want to look at it, through your heart, they will open you up to wonder and transcendence. And that brings me to what I believe, at least my part in what's going on with Soul Lab is. My work in the world is really I believe, to open people up to exploration, to the natural world, really deeply embracing the natural world, and to wonder and transcendence. Not just transcendence within ourselves, which can be a sort of a narcissistic enterprise. I transcendent over all this stuff that's going on, but transcendence, bringing the transcendent into the world and helping other people find their way through and above the circumstances that they live in. And you have to know those paths. Otherwise, you can't guide somebody where you haven't gone. So that's, to me, the natural world is where, or letting ritual come to me is a huge part of my work even now.
I like this idea. I grew up in the country as well, and I do believe that it does hold a space, especially when you're young. And it reminds me of Christ talking about the kingdom within and saying to enter the kingdom you must be like a child and have that sense of openness and wonderment. And and I think that is sort of a gauntlet for us, that we really heavily involved. This thing's heavily involved in this. Whoops, it switched again. Let me. Sensitive. We get heavily involved in our knowns and what we know about reality. We get heavily invested in them. And it feels to me that is one of the biggest challenges. I know in school it was. The further I got in the higher education, the more emphasis was put on. It was like, higher and narrower you were supposed to go. And, I think a lot of us are breaking out of that. And, Lawada, my teacher when I was younger, this amazing Choctaw medicine woman who I love dearly, taught me a lot. And it was all very simple. She said, it's you and another person in a session. And all this other stuff you'll have to eventually unlearn because it's a lot to take in,
Yeah.
Or Carl Jung would say, learn all the mythology you can learn and then let it go.
And then let it go. Yeah.
And be present.
Yeah.
It struck me that this work you do, and I'm looking behind you, and I'm assuming that's a novel unfolding?
That is novel number 3 of a 5 novel series that I'm working on. And I'm talking about following trails through the wilderness. The quick version, I hope, of what I'm doing is I have 12 young people who've been pulled out of juvenile detention and taken to a school up in the Adirondack wilderness of upstate New York to see if they can change so much that they won't fit back into the world that they came out of. The world that shaped them, invited them to become who they were by the time they were 15 and committed some pretty terrible things. I set out with some notions of who these 12 kids and their counselors were. And it's like following these wonderful trails where these characters reveal to me who they really are beneath the story that I created for them. And,
what are some surprises that you've found in your characters as they start to reveal themselves?
Oh, gosh. Just recently. This gets difficult for me to talk about because these people have become so real for me. Let me back up just a little bit and talk about that process, because it really involves the ritual that I go through when I'm in a room that I took over in my townhouse. It was my son's bedroom. He's long gone, married, has a job. Great. And but when I walk in here, I think maybe you can see a little bit behind me. There's a bead curtain on the door that separates me from the outer world. When I step in here, everything in this room, I could spin around my laptop and show you everything on the walls, puts me into the space. There's nothing in this room to distract me. I'm in the world of these characters. There's maps, etc., etc., pictures of the characters on one wall. But then when I walk in the morning, I set an intention, and this lives right beside my laptop. This is a phurba, which is a Tibetan ceremonial dagger, dart, if you will. And I set the intention that I want to enter into the space of these characters. I want to know who they are. I have a general outer story for them, but much like counseling or coaching, over time, the truth about who people are really emerges. Yeah. So it is a very, there is a ritual involved, because this setting the intention focuses my mind and says, you are here. This is your work today. It's like putting the dagger in. This is it. And then, so back to answering your question, Kelly. This happened about a month ago. I was working with a character, a young 15-year-old kid named Rocco, who seems like he's kind of a thug. He's sort of muscly. He's got a couple of gang tattoos on him. And the other kids have, a couple of guys who don't really like him, been teasing him, calling him tats and that sort of thing. And of course, he's, 15-ish and full of himself and trying to impress the girls and everything. But then at one point in the stories, I realized that I woke up and I had this scene in my head of Rocco, and there is a wildlife veterinarian who's working in this program, teaching these kids how to care for something besides themselves. So they're rehabbing animals together. And she grabs Rocco and says, we need to go out. Well, they wind up rescuing two bear cubs. The mother has been killed, her paws cut off, her gallbladder taken out. And sometimes that's what happens, just slaughter of an animal. And Rocco gets touched by one of these, by the runt, the one who's weakest. And I thought, well, it's going to be cool. He's going to work with this runt, and it's going to become his little pet, and he's going to really love this creature till it grows up. And I woke up one night, and I just knew. I said, no, the runt has to die. Rocco has to hold this creature because it will break his heart open. And it is when our heart is broken open for the world that, for me anyway, is a door of entry into empathy. And it's when he makes his first change, his first realization that this isn't all fun and games. When I get out of this program, Dad's going to buy me a muscle car. He's going to take me into the family. His father's really basically a mobster. But he realizes, no, there's something here that was beautiful, that didn't need to die. So that's the sort of thing that happens when, because I want to take people through in my work, what are the steps of change? I could write about these young people from the surface. I worked for years and years with youth organizations and youth ministries, and I've got stories I can tell and interesting and funny things. But what I want to do with my work is take people through the pathway of the heart and have people live through the changes that someone goes through. And that means having to encounter myself. What are those doorways? What are those resistances that we all have? I have, you have, that until we're able to move through those barriers, that's when we are able to move through those barriers. That is when we expand. That is when the spiral gets bigger. That is when we can look back and see who we were before life broke our heart. Sorry. And when we're broken open, that's when we can learn, when we realize what we don't know, when we realize what we haven't had. And all of us, I look back at myself at other ages and I'm like, oh my God, what a jerk. It's like, but I didn't know then what something in life taught me. And there's kind of nothing like a good, kick in the soul to wake you up. So anyway, I hope that answers your question.
It does, and then some. Yeah, this, the compassion starts within, doesn't it? This ability to love and forgive and to redeem in our current state.
Yeah, and I have to be reminded of that over and over again. When I'm coaching authors, like anyone else, you get tired. You've said the same thing 20 times. You've tried to present, this is how you can do this, and it's not working. And then pretty soon in your mind, you're thinking, you're sort of, you can step outside of the person who you're supposed to be guiding, rather than stopping, getting quiet, and saying, show me why they don't know this. Show me why they can't make this change. Yeah. Rather than just, the ego kicks in, we get tired, and, bing, we want to kick them out of our circle. And it isn't that at all. And it is the getting into the heart and soul of the other person. And time again, when I'm doing my coaching work, I find that just right at the point when I'm most irritated, that's when something inside me says, good, because you don't know what you don't know. And shut up and listen, just be quiet, and you'll get it. And sooner or later, something is revealed as to what the issue is, why the client is resistant or blocking you or blocking the material that you're presenting.
That's an interesting point. I remember in school, in clinical psych, we were. I brought up the topic to the larger collective of professors, and this model was coming through, and the first phase of the alchemy is decidedly regressive. It's taking that high Icarus-like inspiration, and there's a fire in there, but it knows that you're an impure vessel, and the whole calcinatio is this mercy purging, purgatorium. It's like burning away what's fantasy, what's desirous in your own egoic nature in order to be a good vessel. And as we enter this final phase of fire, as the stage goes, because it keeps recurring, but this is a stage where this phoenix rises out of the ashes of the old. And, I asked about this notion of regression because in this model, it shows up again and again in all the developmentalists and all of the ancient models. This regression is at least half. In fact, Joseph Campbell's work with the hero's journey, the first part of getting to the elixir really is a very regressive process. And most of them sat up straight and began to create a sort of a pattern of explanation of countertransferences and all these notions that if a person is going through regression in therapy, there is a challenge within the relationship that's going on that must be managed. However, in alchemy, in the fire and the water, it says these are very messy and painful, but very necessary. When the chemistry is acting up, you want to run in and save it. When the wolves are fighting in that crucible, you want to save them. But that's the place the brutal compassion comes in and says, we need to hold space for this to come through without holding judgment.
Yeah.
The wolves are fighting.
The wolves. The wolves. The wolves.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, for me, listening to you and I'm responding, hearing what you're saying and agreeing with what you're saying. For me, what comes through with the image of Icarus is that, see, we all learn things I learned editorial skills, I learned coaching skills, and that's when we think we can fly. I've got it. I've got these techniques, I've got these skills. Yeah, and and you should listen to me. You should look at me. You should, I should be up in front of an audience with 10,000 people thinking I'm wonderful and I'm knowledgeable, and that may actually be true, but at one level. But the shadow side of that is that then you're not available. You're really not available to learn more because you've got your wings. And everybody should be watching you and applauding and going, oh my gosh, And so to me, it's that staying in that vulnerable space with my clients because, when I'm coaching writers, because the pattern of a book will reveal itself if we wait. And I can go in and, I've got my techniques and my outline ways to outline books and that sort of thing, and those are helpful. I'm not going to say that they're not. It's like an architect who knows how to blueprint a house, but standard blueprints don't always fit what the client wants or needs. And so, I can go in and we can start a discussion around this is how you outline a book, this is how you create storyboards, to write novels. But in the end, you have to let the wings melt. And you have to drop into that, I have some idea maybe, but sometimes I really don't have a clue where this is going to go. And then you find that you're co-creating. You're entering into that space and getting into a client's head, getting into thoughts that are chaotic. They aren't necessarily linear. I had to learn years ago how to work with intuitives. We'll talk about that in a minute. That's a world unto itself. But, how do you make linear that which is not linear? How do you bring out of somebody that which they don't even quite know how to articulate? And so, for example, I'm on Facebook and I see in my Facebook feed all these people who, sign up for National Novel Writing Month and you can write a novel in 30 days. Come to me and, we can get your novel or your book written in 60 days. And I think, well, that's probably true, possibly. But what I am in this for, this comes to a vision that I believe came to me. What I'm in this for is this. Years ago, I've been at this for 40 years, and I would say probably 38 years ago, I saw in my mind's eye this vision of this powerful river of light and fire just winding its way over the whole world, and just almost wrapping it up like a string around a baseball, but light and fire, and saw it as the river of consciousness. And realize that that's what I want to do with my life, is to help raise the conscious level on this planet. And for me, that means finding the people and partnering with the people who, like myself, I have a little bucket of light to dump into that river, and so do you. And it's important that we pour that bucket of light into that river to raise the level of light and consciousness. So back to my work with a client, it's really all around partnering with them, because it's not my bucket of light, it's yours. And if I'm forcing you into some form or to some message that isn't true to you, then neither one of us is fulfilling our work here. So
there is this, in for instance, in the hero's journey, looking at these meta structures, something that in this week I'm going to be guiding an inner guide meditation, introducing members to their guides, and it's central to my work personally. Working with my spirit guides is essential. When I work one-on-one with a client, it's always in committee, us two in the middle, but always a committee holding space. And much of what comes through the guidance of these wise ones. And it makes it seem as if it is me that is intuiting, or is the intuitive or psychic. It's not that at all. I simply have learned to listen ever better because they tend to be always right. Where I have my ideas and I have my beliefs, but there's always something guiding this, and it's also that framework as a hologram does it as a whole on of the guide and student relationship also appears as we take this form in human life where you're a guide for others. It's the same sacred holding, sort of in a almost like I can see it like a sort of like a nesting doll, but a little bit more complex. But I like this notion, and it is a daunting task, isn't it, to take on this role of guide? But it is one that even in the hero's myth structure, this is a point when we dare to put ourselves out in the world. We trust that the right people will come. You have to, in order for divine intervention to occur, you have to get off your couch. You have to take that step. And I think that's where the big challenge is. But once you do, there's a certain sense of when all hope seems lost. And as Nietzsche said, all great and wonderful things must first wear a terrifying mask, right? To inscribe itself on the heart of humanity. As you were saying earlier, there is this necessary wounding, and in a shamanism, that's the shamanic practice. There is a certain or very deep welcoming of that because now we know, okay, it's on. And the guide can very often hold that space to say, no, let's keep going. I know it's scary. I know it hurts. I know it's painful to the ego. But if we keep moving through this and let go of what no longer serves us, something beautiful will come through.
Yeah, and I think for what I know that for me, that it took time to trust in that getting lost, that getting lost was actually the way to get found. That coming to that point of saying, great, I have no clue what to do here. And that's also a part of an inner ritual that I do where I will say to that, that either call it the inner ocean or the universe or the ether, the space beyond. I just simply say, over to you. It's like, I don't know what to say here. It could be with my children. It could be with my former wife. It could be with a friend. Just say, all right, I'm over to you. What do I do here? Yeah. And I feel fortunate in that the guides who presented themselves to me, I was a person who didn't trust in the notion of spirit guides, thought it was kind of hokey. And then all of a sudden they showed
Sounds
up.
hokey. It sounds really hokey until you meet them.
Until you meet them, yeah. And I was going through a very, very difficult transition in my life, and coming to terms with my sexuality. And in my 40s, mid 40s, and late 40s, and married and 3 kids, and seeing a therapist, trying to figure out how I was going to make it through. What am I going to do with an 18-year marriage that is in some ways really just not working? What do I do now? And I was working with a therapist and thinking, oh, this isn't working, and why am I spending this money? And I was driving home after an appointment, and all of a sudden it was as if this enormous energy, very strong female energy, just appeared right across my windshield. Now, I didn't see anything, but I knew this presence was there and just shouted in my face, who were you before you let other people tell you who to be? and I looked at myself. It threw me all the way back to being this little kid who loved the world. I knew what I loved in the world, and I knew what I loved in humanity. And I thought it was okay until people told me it was horrible and evil. And I really think that she was sort of the counter to my Catholic mother, who was all about fear. Poor thing. I mean, she'd been subjected to it, so why not subject your kids to it? So she is the fierce woman. And actually, a couple of years later, I was training to run marathons and training for an Ironman. And I was driving over to a river near here one morning, about 20 minutes away from my home. And there's these gorgeous mountain trails. And I was running along the flat along the river, of course, to train. And I'm driving along at 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and she goes, "You're going to run mountain trails today." And I was like, "Oh, hell I am." Yeah,
Really?
you're pulling me in an ox cart. How are we going to do this? And I swear to you, she taught me how to run mountain trails.
Wow.
And then, without belaboring this aspect of the conversation too much, 3 men appeared to me, very ancient Tibetan spirits, and I had no idea who they were. But in my mind, I had this phrase that they were called the Deathless Ones.
Wow.
And in a meeting with 2 twin psychic sisters, first thing they did was look at me and say, you've probably been a Buddhist monk and many lifetimes. You've been an animist. You love nature. Nature speaks to you. Like, yeah. And they said, these 3 men are standing behind you. Who are the Deathless Ones?
Wow.
And they are the men who are known to have codified a spirituality that I practice, which is called Bön. Which is really a pre-Buddhist form of shamanism. So yeah, when I say over to you guys, that's who I mean. It's like you can see farther than I can. You know what's going on here. I'm lost. I'm tired. I'm human. I want my blanket. Help me out here.
Yeah. There's something beautiful about that. Very, I remember meeting with my council of elders when I was younger, and they said it was very daunting to be in front of them because there were 21 of them or so. But one of the key things they said to me at that time was one of the most important words that I would know in this lifetime, although I was too young at 19 or 20 to understand it at this point, but the word is redemption. Mm-hmm. And everything since then has just brought that to a new level. And one of my clients looked it up and she said, "Oh, this is an interesting telling of redemption, is that it's earning back what was already there." So, we talk about burning away and washing away, and really we're just, it's like we're dropped in the middle of a labyrinth of reality. As Joseph Campbell says, it's like entering in the middle of a movie and being too afraid to ask what's going on in the movie and then having to leave before it's over, And in the midst of all that, there are guides to support us. And there is the redemption comes into the release into that webbing of that networking. This idea that the amount of power we put into something, whether we want to be an attorney or whether we want to write a book or whatever it is, if it comes from a singular point, if it comes from a sort of like a computer without wireless connection, it will only have what's available within that range. But if you do whatever you're doing for a collective good, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. If you're doing it for that, you're going to be tapping into that collective wisdom. And so you can understand where the ritual and ceremony comes in necessarily. It brings these motifs and symbols and metaphors into a space of holding, like your beautiful room there that says, I'm holding ceremony for this.
Yeah, and I won't pick up the computer, but hang on one second. I'll just grab something. This is there's a little altar beside me where I have water that I was able to get from a place called Gangotri, which is the highest source of the Ganges.
Wow.
And so I pour water out as an offering on this altar, and you can see it real well here, but probably not.
You can.
All right. This as I was writing, working on these novels, 2 things. One, I realized that I was webbed in, connected to all these characters and letting their voices speak. That it's in a sense I'm giving voice to them, but they're also telling me who they are and how they want their lives to speak through the story. And this image appeared to me. There is a Tibetan shaman, believe, big surprise, whose name is Sam. And he left Tibet because he was trying to escape from his calling. He was young and full of young guy stuff and wanted to get out into the world, and also wanted to escape being kidnapped by the Chinese, because that's what's happening to spiritual leaders in Tibet. And so Sam runs away from his calling, winds up basically working as a helper in this mountain school. And doesn't he run into a young boy who is a reincarnation of what is called a Sakyong? Sakyong, in anglicized, it's like Sakyong, and it means an earth protector.
Wow.
And these novels really are based in the theme that we have one earth to protect. This is it.
Yeah.
And these kids, by learning how to get outside of themselves, will connect with animals and the natural world. And suddenly, wait a minute, it's not just about me anymore. It's about how do we save all of this. And so this image came, which I've flashed and not referenced. Sam is in a soul journey one day, soul retrieval journey for someone. And the Buddha of the one beautiful earth appears to him. And it's the thought, a Buddha can be this beautiful concept. And there's a little one that a Sanskrit one that I've drawn on his chest with a little gold ink. And it's the thought. It's my devotion every day is to this thought, this concept that we have one beautiful earth to protect or not. And so that's how I come in, and that's part of my ritual. It's reminding myself, this isn't about just entertainment. When you write a novel, you got to make the pages turn. You got to know how to do that. But it isn't about writing a bestseller. It's about awakening. Anybody who reads these books, I want them to awaken to the fact that do one thing. We have this, I don't care if you stop using plastic straws and use paper straws, if that's your commitment to this. We have one thing and do it. And I know that this, sort of emerged, from the teachers, this little guy, this is your avatar. This is the banner, if you will, spiritual banner for you to follow. And so it keeps me focused in my work, my particular work.
It's important to have that focal symbol, whether it's Tibetan symbols, or whether it's something that, like you said, an image of a person in your book, something that holds that nexus point for what it is that you're here to do. And one of the things I became more and more grateful for in these models, whether it's a medicine wheel or mandalas, is this notion that everything is connected, and that's sort of the synthesis of the elements, right? But there is also this distillation, the spiraling in and spiraling out, that toroidal kind of constant movement that is we're tending to, and that brings more process than anything else, right? There is this attending to where you are in the process. And as in a certain way, Carl Jung talked about, no matter where you are, always keep your eye on the center. And that keeps the centripetal and centrifugal pulls and pushes moving in allegiance to something of a mystery within, of that inner beingness, right? I certainly have my the Tara, the Dalai Lama. I have images of my wife and my kids. I have several things that are here, but the fire realm is really about saying, what is it that's deeper than the ego? Although it's an egoic, future-oriented questing, it really is about being willing to burn, being willing to go beyond what's comfortable, to be true to more and more what is wanting to be revealed through you. as I believe firmly that each one of us has a unique directive in this world. And what we're holding space for, right, when we reach out beyond our own learning and supporting others, is say, I see you, I see who you are, I see that deeper within you, maybe than you can even see for yourself right now. Mm-hmm. And I'm holding space for that divine to come through you, because you are the only one that can deliver this. And if you fail it in this lifetime, you'll have many times to come back, and we do this. We do it over and over. And I think there is a refining process. We've been doing this over and over again, and we find new ways of bringing the same truth forward in a way that could be palatable. I'm building a organizational template, it's surveys, and these things that I'm from other realms. I'm getting adapted to this. Why am I bothering doing this? Because there's value in adapting to the modern times and holding space for spirit and sacred geometry and all the rest to come through within a modern framework. And it's always now, which is modern.
Yeah. And applying these ancient truths to now, I mean, they're for different purposes, to accomplish different purposes that maybe those purposes weren't needful before.
Yeah.
But they are now. I mean, we're at a point now, from my perspective, where, they keep telling us the gap is closing between now and when we can turn things around, for this planet.
Yeah.
And so I know that this, I was brought into this world, and as a little kid fell in wonder, with the natural world, and feel this great horror, when I realized that, 40 to 50% of animal species have disappeared. Every year we lose another 10% of frog species. And if not me, then who? If I don't speak up, if I don't create voices that say, get out there, become a Sakyong, become an earth protector.
Yeah.
And who? And similarly, with the people I work with, and since this is people who are coaches and people workers, caregivers are listening to this, you're right. I mean, it is in not what I need to deliver to this world when I'm working with you, but what do you need to deliver? What's your bucket of light? And how do I partner with you creatively to pull out of you to help you get beyond those inner blocks that you might have? They might just be technical skills. I just don't know how to say this and organize this. Sometimes I find that there's deeper resistances in people. I helped we need to help them overcome, so that they can deliver their message to the world. About 4 or 5 years ago, I worked with a guy who was a Cobra helicopter pilot, did 2 tours of duty in Iraq. And when I met Dan, he handed me a 475-page manuscript and said, please read this and tell me what you think. So I read it and sat down with him, and I said, well, it's a collection of combat stories. And he's like, well, are they good? And I'm like, yeah, but it's kind of like flat soda, Dan. There's no purpose here. And I could see this guy was getting irritated, 475 pages. And I said, but wait, there's something here. We haven't found it yet. Without going through the process of how we found it, what emerged was that Dan had come back from Iraq with a pretty good case of post-traumatic stress disorder, and was hiding it and didn't want to talk about it. And the day that I put my finger on an episode in the manuscript where he's flying the Cobra, and he's in a firefight and looking through the scope of a weapon, and has his thumb ready to depress a trigger that will deploy a missile. And he's looking at a target on the ground. And the command post is shouting in his ear, in the radio headset, Dan, asset number so-and-so, deploy the weapon. And he couldn't do it. And that's where I said, Dan, why couldn't you do that? And he stopped. He started biting his lower lip. And I said, well, I can wait. I mean, you couldn't see it. You didn't know where you were firing at. And he was like, no, that wasn't it. And I said, well, tell me, there's some reason here. There's something you're not willing to talk about. So there was an impediment to him getting out what this book actually became. And he said, you want to see me cry, don't you? And I said, well, I'm a crier, so I'll just start crying and then you'll feel better about yourself, And he said, all right, well, I'll tell you. He said, I was looking through the scope of the weapon, and down on the ground, 400, 500 feet below me, is a man with a white shirt and brown pants. And they're yelling in my ear, is that the target? Take out the target. And he said, but I didn't know if this was the enemy combatant that I was supposed to take out, or if this was somebody's daddy who had gone out for a quart of milk and was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Yeah. And I said, what did you do? Because you deployed the weapon. And he said, I just shut everything down. I stopped feeling. I just became a machine. And I deployed the weapon. And I said, well, what happened? And he started really getting angry. And he said, all right, I'll tell you what happened. You send out a missile with a heat-seeking tip about 300 feet from the target. The tip explodes into 1,000 pieces of shrapnel. In 1 second, there's a man there. In the next second, there's a pink vapor. Try not seeing that when you lay down on your bunk at night. I see it every night of my life. And I said, Dan, there's your story. And he said, I don't want to talk about what's going on inside of me. I said, how many combat veterans do you think are dealing with the same stuff you're dealing with? Yeah. And he said, tens of thousands. That's why we're killing ourselves every day. Yeah. And I said, well, what if you gave voice to this? What if you were the one who spoke up and said, we don't have to live with these horrible memories. We can get help. And he said, look at me. There's nothing wrong with me. I don't have any scars. I came back with a Bronze Star. A number of my friends came back with severe wounds, and some came back in body bags. And this phrase, this is where when you're open, because you know that these things come from somewhere, not necessarily from you. I just said spontaneously, Dan, not all wounds are visible. Hmm. And that became the back cover headline on his book, After Action. And Dan speaks to thousands of wounded warriors all over the United States now. Hmm. Because we got through the bottleneck, the plug, the thing that he didn't want to say, to get to what needed to be said. And so sometimes your work is just sitting and waiting and saying, I don't know what's wrong here. I don't know why this person, this client, this friend, this lover, this child, this son or daughter, why they can't move ahead. Help me out here. Show me what I need to see. Mm-hmm. And once those blockages are moved, wow, just the healing that flows through that book is incredible.
Wow. Yeah. And it very often takes that willingness to be in service to allow for that personal catharsis to occur. And it's interesting, like if you look at in the alchemical concept, the fire leads to the water. Icarus, when everything's burned away, he goes into this vertical ascent into the water. And in the first phase of water, as we look at it astrologically, is the fourth house of what nurtures you, what's home. And that's the high priestess. And like you were talking before, in that space where everything's burning away, comes this feminine force that says, I see you, and remember when you were a little boy. Yeah. These are the things that we're trying to come back home to. I love the invitation, and I love the fire for that reason, because it in the right hemisphere parts of our brains, even it holds this counterpoint to the feminine, emotional, inner experience of why are we doing this? Why am I so compelled to help others? But it seems to work better if we get so involved in self-help, right?
Mm.
What helps most people when they're depressed is to go out and help other people. That is a direct form of self-help. The most direct is helping others. I
Yeah.
love that concept, and
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So
beautiful story. I love the intertwining of your spiritual work and your professional work, and this understanding of how to hold space for that. Because in the mix, right, there's a lot of chaos and confusion and uncertainties and unknowns, and but the outcome, goes through the water, comes out into the earth and air, and there's a gift. There's a medicine, elixirs.
yeah, and so not so often. There is a change in the life of the author that isn't necessarily represented even by the product, the book they develop,
Wow.
because it may be the first time that they've ever walked through a really deeply creative process where they had to trust, or they had to become honest in Dan's case about something that his warrior ego had to die in order to receive help.
Yeah.
And those are risky times. And in his case, thank goodness he went through it. And with other people, it might be that they're going through some kind of a life change or an illness or something in a relationship. And if you're there and open as a coach, as a guide, somehow what you're doing in the creative process will translate into medicine in their private life. That just fascinates me to watch somebody come back and say, you were coaching me about one thing. We were talking about a character or a structure or whatever it might have been. And the whole time you were talking, this voice was speaking inside of me saying, listen to this. This is for you.
Yeah.
And that's so far beyond us as individuals. That is when that we're all encompassed and we're all webbed in this great web of energy and consciousness that is speaking all the time. And if that doesn't keep us in the mode of humility,
Yeah.
that sometimes it's so little about what we do directly and just about our availability, just about our surrender.
Yeah. And being willing to show up for it, and
Yeah.
know that there's something coming through if you do show up.
There's something else too. I think I want to add that it's being willing to take a risk.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm asked by my guides to do other things. Go and put flowers on the grave of someone's wife. And it's being willing to be a risk taker, to say, I really don't know what this is about, but I'm willing to do it. Yeah. I sort of jokingly say, these guys know I'll do anything for a laugh, so that's why they ask me. It's like, all right, I'm game. I'll go try and see what happens. But I mean it very seriously in working with clients. That sometimes you say, I've got something coming through here, and this may be way off, but I'm going to try it anyway. And you say it, and they just say, and you're really a fool to believe that it's a gift that you have. It's an availability. It's an open space. It's a willingness to open a space and then take a risk, because you could just as easily be way off as way on, right on. So, it's risking availability.
Yeah. That reminds me of, as always, when truth comes in, it comes in the simplest ways. And I remember, again, back to my teacher, Lawada, said, when you're in the presence of another, in the sacred holding, the sacred center, the sacred vessel, tune into yourself, tune into your breath, and say silently and reverently to yourself, I don't have a fucking clue what to do.
Yeah. That.
And in that space, it opens it up. But if I'm receptive, and if I drop out of here and into the heart, from the fire of the mind to the that spirit, that intuitive into the heart, that holds this place for mystery, the higher and the lower selves, to come together in this space. And together we hold that space. Then between us, something greater emerges, the God between.
Yeah. Yeah, that is it. That is it.
That's that is, for me, I know that is, I think, the elixir that when it comes through, and it does every time, if I show up well, and if we all show up well, that God between, that mystery between, is so beautiful and redemptive and transformative that I'm willing to risk all of my uncertainties and my egoic challenges to hold a greater and greater space for that.
Yeah, it's the beauty of being the the shaman talk about being the hollow, the bone flute, that the music is played through, and it's you think whatever metaphor you want to use, music or water or this beautiful life-giving fire, if it's flowing through you, you're going to get the benefit of it. It's going to benefit you too.
It will ultimately.
Yeah.
Well, this has been beautiful, David. I knew it would be, and I'm very grateful for you showing up in my life. The support for Soul Lab, and for this endeavor, and for all of those beautiful souls to come who will benefit from the beautiful space that you're holding to bring medicine to the world, to bring out their elixirs to the world. It's a very powerful place to be. So thank you for all that you do.
Well, thanks. And thanks for making this community, because I'm by nature, I love solitude, and I love to pull away on my own. And so to be reminded in a really wonderful, visceral way like this, that there's also a tribe, and I can come back to the tribe at the end of the day and be fed by what everyone else, by their journeys, by their knowledge, their experience, fed by their questions, like as I have questions.
Yeah. And there is certainly a place for the messiness of it all within this, because there, at this point, the humility and the humbling and all the rest of that are, we've all been through plenty enough. We come together with these experiences, and it's a wonderful thing to honor. And not only are we holding space for each other, if done well, we're also providing some medicine for those that the next 7 generations. And that's definitely broadening the scope and saying, how do we help those that, as Bill Gates said, no one gets to vote on technological advancement. We will have these. We will have this, but it's always the issue of modernity. We're all suffering it, but like you said, if not me, who? If not us, who will it be? Yeah. Can we do it? Why not? I mean, what else are we going to do? Suffer?
Yeah, I'm headed towards 64, and I really would look terrible in bad golf pants, and I can't swing a club, and so I think, what the hell else would I be doing but trying to save the planet? What else am I going to do from now till they cart me off? This is what I want to do.
Well, that's a good reason to come together all by itself, and it's beautiful, because when we're around each other, there is we're bigger than, and more expansive, and we feel capable. This isn't hard when we hold space for each other, when there is this connection, because we really are all one in this, for sure.
Yeah. Well, sir, thank you so much for this conversation. Very rich.
Thank you, everyone. Please leave messages and enter into a discussion, a dialogue with each other and with the groups and beyond that. And tell us where you are in your creative process and what's coming through, what rituals and ceremonies, whether they're working for you, not working for you, where are you at with it. And hopefully some of this spoke to some part of you that needed to hear this, and certainly there are plenty of people out there that need to hear your story as well, as David is a holder and a guide for that. So if you're looking, if you have a book, and in fact, he's someone to approach. He's been very. We're just getting started on this journey ourselves, and it's given me the courage to do something I've been working on for 15 years now. So I hope all of you find this helpful, and I hope this Fire 3 arena and excite something deeper within all of you. Thank you, and I'll talk soon on the platform. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.